Hello students, in the last lecture you learnt how the King of France, Louis XVI, and his wife, Queen Marie Antoinette, were executed and how the Jacobins came to power. In this module, you will study about the reign of terror established by the Jacobins led by Maximilien Robespierre, formation of the Directory and rise of Napoleon Bonaparte in France. The First Republic saw the reign of terror. With the beheading of Louis XVI and the establishment of the First Republic began the reign of terror. The period from 1793 to 1794 is considered as reign of terror because Robespierre followed a principle of severe punishment and control. This period saw a lot of violence against not only the aristocracy but also anyone who was suspected of being against the revolution. Maximilien Robespierre was seen as the chief architect of the reign of terror. Robespierre championed the rights of the people. The First Republic began with the reign of terror from 1793 to 1794. France saw a lot of violence against not only the aristocracy but also anyone who was suspected of being against the revolution. Maximilien Robespierre the Incorruptible. Maximilien Robespierre was the leader of the Jacobin Club. After the formation of the National Convention, he was elected to the Committee of Public Safety. He was seen as the chief architect of the reign of terror and championed the rights of the people. He was known to be an honest and upright man, so much so that he was nicknamed the Incorruptible. But he was also very rigid and inflexible. He did not tolerate dissent. Robespierre wanted to fight for the rights of citizens. But he soon realized that before that people needed food. So while in power, Robespierre introduced many reforms to ensure a regular food supply in the cities, especially Paris. The reforms were well intentioned but not always popular. Now let us see the reforms introduced by Robespierre. A maximum ceiling was placed on wages and prices. Meat and bread were rationed. It was made compulsory for peasants to bring their grain onto the city and sell them at government regulated prices. The use of the more expensive white flour was banned. All citizens were to eat the plain d'égalité or equality bread made of whole wheat. Forms of address like Monsieur or Sir and Madame or Madam were done away with. Henceforth, all French men and women were to be called citoyen and citoyenne or citizen. Churches were shut down and buildings were turned into soldiers' barracks or offices. The changes which were brought out after the formation of convention. Elections were held in France in which all men of 21 years and above, regardless of wealth, got the right to vote. The newly formed government was called convention. Monarchy was abolished and France was now declared as a republic. Misuse of guillotine by Robespierre. On June 4, 1794, Robespierre was almost unanimously elected president of the National Convention. 6 days later, a law was passed that suspended a suspect's right to public trial and to legal assistance. In just a month, 1,400 enemies of the revolution were guillotined. Guillotine is a device which had 2 poles and a blade with which a person is beheaded, named after Dr. Guillotine, who invented it. There was an almost indiscriminate use of the guillotine against anyone who was considered an enemy of the revolution. Many of Robespierre's political opponents were executed. Soon, his own supporters and partymen began to turn against him, worried by his extremely radical policies. More than 17,000 people had been guillotined during this reign of terror. The figure was taken from Charles Dickens' A Sale of Two Cities, strongly brings out the victimization of the poor and innocent at this time of intense political confusion and violence. Robespierre, a tyrant. On 27 July 1794, during a debate in the Hall of Liberty, Robespierre came under a scathing verbal attack. In the excitement, a call went up for the arrest of Robespierre, who was called a tyrant. The more conservative members of the convention saw their chance to get rid of extreme radicalism and ordered the arrest of Robespierre and his supporters. They had been conspiring to do the same for some time. Guillotine of Robespierre. In the ensuing melee, Robespierre managed to escape, but was declared an outlaw and sentenced to be guillotined within 24 hours without a trial. He was caught in the early hours of the 28th. Robespierre and his allies were placed under arrest by the National Assembly. Robespierre was taken to the Luxembourg prison in France, but the warden refused to jail him and he fled to the Hotel de Ville. Armed supporters arrived to aid him, but he refused to lead a new insurrection. When he came to know that the National Convention had declared him as an outlaw, he shot himself in the head, but only succeeded in wounding his jaw. Shortly thereafter, troops of the National Convention attacked the Hotel de Ville and seized Robespierre and his allies. The next evening, July 28th, Robespierre and 21 others were guillotined without a trial in the Place de la Révolution. End of the Reign of Terror. During the next few days, another 82 Robespierre followers were executed. The Reign of Terror came to an end. Later in the day, he was guillotined with 21 of his closest associates. He got no trial in accordance with the law that he was instrumental in passing, suspending suspects' right to public trial and to legal assistance. With Robespierre's death and the fall of the Jacobins, power passed into the hands of the wealthier middle class. This was followed by the White Terror, where anyone seen associated with Robespierre were arrested and executed without the trials. In the aftermath of the coup, the Committee of Public Safety lost its authority. Formation of the Directory. The convention introduced a new constitution which denied the right to vote to the non-propertied classes. They re-established freedom of worship, began releasing large numbers of prisoners, and most importantly, initiated elections for a new legislative body. On 3rd November 1795, the Directory was established. Under this system, France would now be led by a bicameral parliament consisting of an upper chamber called the Council of Elders with 250 members and a lower chamber called the Council of 500 with accordingly 500 members and a collective executive of 5 members called the Directory, from which the historical period gets its name. Director Paul Barras. Paul Barras was the only director to serve during the entire term of the Directory. The period of the Directory was extremely unstable. Directors often clashed with each other and with the legislature. The legislature then sought to dismiss the directors and appoint new ones. However, despite its political instability, it did provide a period of relative peace in France after the intensely violent reign of terror. The rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. The instability and volatility of the Directory phase set the stage for the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, first as the first consul and ultimately as the Emperor of France. An insight into the life of Napoleon Bonaparte. Since 1792, revolutionary France had been engaged in armed conflict with several nations like Austria and Prussia. During this period, Napoleon Bonaparte was rapidly rising through the ranks of the army and defeated the much larger Austrian forces in 1796. After some spectacular initial victories, Napoleon's forces were routed in Egypt, which he had invaded, in the hopes that it would paralyze Britain's trade with India. He returned to Paris and, by concealing the extent of his losses in Egypt and through political intrigue, he helped overthrow the Directory. The Directory was replaced with a 3-member consulate, since he established a military dictatorship by getting himself elected as the first consul, a title that Julius Caesar held many centuries ago. Napoleon, considered as a modernizer of Europe. He introduced many reforms such as protection of private property, uniform system of weights and measures provided by the decimal system. Many of his measures carried the revolutionary ideas of liberty and modern laws to different parts of Europe. He was considered to be a liberator of Europe. Establishment of Napoleon in France. Napoleon's imperial system was based on the Roman model. He launched a referendum. The people were tired of the failure of the Directory. Napoleon had given the French great pride due to his successful military campaigns. His Austrian campaign of 1800, which resulted in their withdrawal from Italy, and the French occupation of these territories greatly added to his aura. He was seen as the most successful military general France had ever seen. People of France voted overwhelmingly to see him crowned as Emperor of the French. Coronation of Napoleon. Napoleon's coronation took place on 2nd December 1804. 2 separate crowns were brought for the ceremony. A golden laurel wreath recalling the Roman Empire and a replica of Charlemagne's crown. Napoleon entered the ceremony wearing the laurel wreath and kept it on his head throughout the proceedings. For the official coronation, he raised the Charlemagne crown over his own head in a symbolic gesture, but never placed it on top because he was already wearing the golden wreath. Instead, he placed the crown on Josephine's head. This spelled the end of the First Republic of France. However, Napoleon wanted to show that his empire was not a descendant of the ancient regime, but a new beginning in the history of France. The ceremony was designed to reflect this thinking, where there were some important departures from the coronation ceremonies of the Bourbons. Despite the fact that Pope Pius VII was present at the ceremony, Napoleon crowned himself emperor and his wife Josephine as empress. This was the mark of the separation of religious authority and temporal power. This was also an important departure from the earlier imperial structure. Summary. On 21st January 1793, end of monarchy with beheading of Louis XVI. June 4th, 1794, Robespierre unanimously elected President of the National Convention. June to July 1794, Robespierre makes a number of legislations to protect the revolution, including suspending a suspect's right to public trial and to legal assistance. From 27th to 28th July 1794, Robespierre's fall, arrest and sentenced to death by guillotine. 3rd November 1795, the Directory is established. The Directory proves to be unstable and inefficient and paves the way for the rise of Napoleon. 9th to 10th November 1799, Directory was overthrown and power seized by the Consulate with Napoleon as first consul. 2nd December 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned Emperor of France after a referendum. This marks the end of the French Revolution. In the next lecture, we will learn about the abolition of slavery in France and its colonies, the triangular trade, the condition of slaves, and the stages which led to its abolition. Thank you.